Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of PD and P-Dubs Unscripted. We're glad you're with us, and on this Thursday afternoon on February 9th, we're recording another Faith Intersections topic. PD, good to see you.
Good to see you on this beautiful rainy day out there. It's a pretty rainy February.
Yeah, well, it melted a lot of the snow, if not all of it, and so, we'll get through it.
Except for the two things we've kind of talked. I don't know if we were on the podcast. I thought one we've talked about. You've talked about a fundraiser of the snow pile in our corner of our parking lot, taking guesses on when that would melt, or outside the parking garage there
in Palatine. Yeah. The one in Palatine outside the parking garage lasts well into April. I know that, and maybe sometimes May.
This year, I don't know.
I don't think we'll have much of a snow pile in the corner.
No, and the school one is dwindling down pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, that one year I thought it was going to stay longer, and all of a sudden we got a couple warm days, and down she goes.
Right, I think we talked about the one time when we did the community meal when we were doing the drive-thru, and we were just standing out there in the cold, in the dark, like, well, nobody's here.
Yeah, what do we talk about? But, so hey, I was going to invite you to the community meal, but you'll hear this next week. So
yeah, the community meal would be done by then.
Yeah, it will be. And if you came, we hope you had a good time. How's that?
Yeah, enjoyed some chili, and I wonder how people will do on the Super Bowl quiz that is on the placemats. Yeah. Gwen showed me that this afternoon, and I went through there, and I did okay.
Yeah, she's got some tough questions on there.
There were some couple, and there were some I kind of disagreed. I had some questions about a couple.
Okay. All right.
Like the one was like, who won the Super Bowl in 2010? And I was like, is it 2010 season or the calendar year 2010?
Ooh.
Because I was like, because I had the wrong answer because I was like, well, I know 2010. I would have been on Vicarage. And I remember who I watched that year in 2010.
Okay. Well,
so that was,
Well, and you had a kind of a non-football person, finding these facts. So.
But no, it was good. Good questions.
Yeah, good. That's great. Today we wanted to explore some poll results that PD found from the National Youth Gathering last year that he and a group from Emmanuel attended amongst, about 18,000?
20,000 altogether. And, it's our big youth conference that our church body, the LCMS, offers every 3 years for high school age kids, youth, and, it rotates throughout the country where it's at. Like 2022 is in Houston. The next one, 2025, is going to be back in New Orleans, where I've been to a couple in New Orleans. And so it's always a great time for the kids. Like, some of the kids shared about their experience here at Emmanuel and just like seeing how that affected them, and then even as their pastor watching them worship, where like they just worship so freely and not caring what others around them thought, just doing whatever the Holy Spirit led them to do while they were worshiping.
Yeah, it's a powerful setting. Last year was at Minute Maid Park, right?
Yeah,
where the Astros play, and saw a lot of pictures and videos just kind of showing what you're talking about, like just true worshiping in spirit and in truth, as Jesus said.
Right, and it was, the first gathering since COVID really was a big thing, and so it was interesting to see how that kind of affected things, which I think COVID probably might play in the results into some of these results of this poll.
Yeah.
And so as Pastor mentioned, P-Dubs mentioned, like, yesterday when I was on Facebook, I saw the LCMS or the Youth Gathering page post, hey, we have our results from our survey that we took at the NYG. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know this really existed. I must have missed that area. But so it says here in the report, which you can find online, and maybe I can link it up too, that in July of 2022, 1,744 youth took the poll at the National Youth Gathering in Texas. And there's a lot of different things that they were asking them about. There are some adult leaders, some YAVs, the young adult volunteers, which I believe are 18 to 25-year-olds usually. They're usually known as the orange shirts. So it's just kind of one of those interesting things, like going through this, because like I said, it dives into a whole lot of different things. And so those 1,744 youth that took this poll, 36% were male, 64% were female, 90% confirmed in the LCMS, 6% baptized in the LCMS, 4% other Christian, less than 1% not a Christian, which I think that's nice that friends are willing to invite their non-Christian friends to the National Youth Gathering.
Mm-hmm.
You see 2% of them were 13 years old, 20% were 14 years old, 22% were 15, 21% 16 years old, 20% were 17, then 13% were 18, then 2% were 19. So just kind of, looking at that, generally mostly between 14 and 17 years old.
Right.
That's 80% of them right there, 83% actually. But then you look at the next one, I attend worship weekly, only 71%, which is better than I would have thought.
Right, yes.
Worship less than weekly is 29%. 68% of them were public school kids, 18% were Lutheran schools, 7% were other private schools, and 7% were homeschooled.
And that's not a surprising stat that 68% are public school, because by the time our kids get into high school, they are going into a public school.
Yeah, because I would say, out of our group, 6 were public school, 1 was a private school, and 1 was homeschool.
Okay.
Then that would be our breakdown.
Yeah.
So pretty similar, I would say, breakdown to that.
For sure.
But, so one of the kind of areas that they asked everybody about was like spiritual belief or practice. And so they kind of broke that down, and we're not going to talk about all of these because there is a lot of different things.
A lot of data.
And I know it can kind of like when you hear me just saying all these numbers, it's like, easy to zone out.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics here. But like one thing is like salvation. To be saved, you have to believe in Jesus Christ. Those that attend weekly, 77% of them said, yep, we're on board. The non-weekly worshipers said 56% of them said they're on board on that one.
See, so now that's really interesting. You'd think that would be like close to 100, whether you worship weekly or not. So it's interesting. The next one, to be saved, you have to believe in Jesus and do good works. Well, of those who worship weekly, only 7% responded positively to that, and the non-weekly, it was only 9%. So if it's not faith in Jesus, and it's not, most of them feel it's Jesus, right? But not 100%. Maybe I'm just being like wishing that we could have 100% or 90%.
Right, because it's one of those like, that's like a core belief of the LCMS, Lutheran Church. Like, that's what we preach. Like, hey, faith in Jesus Christ. Like, that's what it is in confirmation, what we preach in sermons.
Yeah. And maybe this is where we see a little, where other people are thinking. 10% of those that worship weekly feel that there's many paths that lead to salvation. So that's an interesting thing. 10% of those in these youth categories who worship weekly feel like there's a lot of pathways.
And 20% in the non-weekly. So you can say that's 30% of them then.
Yeah,
which is like, wow. Like, I'm like, man, like, and I understand that maybe because that's like that whole like coexist thing, bumper sticker you see that people want to think, oh, all roads lead to heaven. Well, that's not what Jesus says.
Yeah, and perhaps it's a reflection of our culture and the people that they are friends with. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this poll who have friends who aren't church-going people, who aren't people of faith, that, they want them to be saved too. So maybe they're kind of leaning more into that inclusivity, or for the sake of inclusivity, leaning into a cultural like thought.
Right, and it's not just friends; it could be even family members, parents possibly. And so, I know we've had that here at Emmanuel from time to time, and that's come up in confirmation. That's always like that hard one as a pastor to answer. Like, it isn't hard because I know the answer, but it's like you don't want that person to be like, "Well, you're telling me my loved one's not going to go to heaven now."
Right.
I'm like, well, I can't contradict Scripture. But I also want to be loving and caring to this individual to not make them feel like, well, why am I going here then if you're teaching that my loved one or my family member is not going to make it to heaven?
Right. So it's a matter of the heart, I think, is what we're getting at with these responses regarding salvation.
Yeah, and I think we'll skip down kind of to the spiritual practices a little bit. This is an interesting, and it kind of goes with what I've noticed this year in confirmation, because we talked about prayer with the 6th and 7th graders this year. But pray on your own daily 60% of those that 60% of those that worship weekly pray on their own daily, and 35% of those that non-weekly worship pray daily. Which is just like, to me, it's heartbreaking that it's barely over half, in a sense, for those that attend weekly pray on a daily basis, because that's such a great way to get strength and encouragement throughout the day is to pray.
Yeah. In a way, I'm not surprised.
No, because
and I wonder, here's our youth. I wonder what the percentage would be for adults. I'm kind of thinking they might be less. I don't know.
But I mean, I would say these answers fit with what because I kind of pulled the confirmation kids, those 2 classes, and obviously it's not 1,700 kids.
Yeah.
But it is kind of that, I pray at night. I might pray at meals. Well, I pray at school if they attend like Emmanuel. I was like, well, that's different than on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's in a sense like a forced, not in a negative way.
Yeah. So I think that's the key to this, pray on own daily. So, you can be encouraged. 60% of those who worship weekly, it's kind of one of those that you could cut either way. And I think, the next one, pray on your own rarely or never. Of those who worship weekly, 12% pray on their own rarely or never. So that's encouraging.
Right.
And then the non-weekly ones, 28%, which is still not bad.
Right.
It's just a slight dip off of the 35% of those non-weeklies who pray daily.
Right. And then I don't know. This next one's kind of sad, a little heartbreaking. Like, read Bible on your own daily. 15% of those that worship regularly, and 6% that non-weekly worship. So 21% of the youth there 21% of the youth read their Bible every day on their own.
Well, and that gets into a topic of biblical literacy, right? I mean, we see this in our adults, and like here, the reflection of the poll shows that our youth are kind of maybe following that pattern.
Right, and that's what they see maybe from their own home life.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know, like if you can see in your 12 years of ministry now, in my 11, like the change in like biblical literacy and like confirmation or working with just people in general, that it's like, I know there's times where I wonder, I'm like, I had to have known what that was when I was, that age.
Right.
It's just like...
Yeah, I noticed there's many students who are still trying to navigate their way around the Bible itself as a book.
Right.
And I know the advent of technology where they can just like call up wherever, 1 Corinthians on their Bible app. They don't have to know where it is in the Bible. So when I see them looking through the Bible and struggling, it's like, I think we probably knew our way around the Bible a little bit more because we didn't have apps.
Right.
And so you had to do that.
Right. Someone said go to Ezekiel 37:15. Mm-hmm. You understood to look for the big 37 in Ezekiel, then the little 15.
Yeah.
But even now, like there's times where I'm like, okay, kind of hand walk kids through that. This is what I mean when I say this Bible passage reference.
Right. So, yeah, that's a sad one there. Read their Bible on their own rarely or never, and that's where these really go up. 51% of those who worship weekly say they rarely read their Bible or never, and then 76% of those who don't worship weekly read their Bible rarely or never. That's right, what we're talking about. And maybe, I think that'll get into another question about, where do they find, what do they look to for answers in their life, right? So we'll kind of just whet the appetite there.
Right, and then kind of skipping, we won't go much into this next one too much, but there's one that I think is kind of just interesting. I don't know why, but it's like take a physical Bible to school. And maybe we kind of answer this, but almost every day, 18% of the kids said that they do that, which is an increase from 12% in 2019 with the youth gathering in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
But the one that just intrigues me is like Lutheran schools. 55% of those that attend Lutheran schools bring their Bible almost every day to school.
Yeah, I wonder if they're like, is it there in their locker and they count that as bringing it?
Or is it because like at our school, the kids have Chromebooks so they can go to like Bible Gateway. But it's still just, I don't know, like you would think the Lutheran school, you'd bring it every day.
Yeah.
But then again, we see at confirmation that kids
I know.
don't bring.
I'm constantly handing out Bibles at confirmation. Like,
So-
you didn't bring your Bible? Oh, it's up in my locker. Can I go get it?
Oh, I need my Bible for
Oh,
confirmation?
imagine that.
So, yeah, that's just something I just thought was a little interesting one on that one.
Well, and, honestly, think about, let's just say for worship, how many percentage of adults bring their Bible to worship? In the Lutheran churches.
I was going to say, it might depend on the denomination. The Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, it's slim pickings.
Yeah, it is. We encourage people to open up your Bibles, right? And we provide them in the pew racks. And, some people are doing it. They're pulling their Bibles out in the pew racks, but hardly anybody brings their own, right? So, not really different in the adult world.
Oh, and I guess I didn't look all the way down at these answers, but no, I use a digital Bible.
Oh, there you go. That's the big one.
43% in 2022, that's what they bring to school. 48% compared to 48% in 2019, which is interesting that it dropped.
Dropped 5%.
But then again, it increased in bringing a physical.
Yeah.
And then 27% use it in the Lutheran schools.
Okay,
so
there you go.
So that, 55 plus 27, that's 80, right?
Mm-hmm.
83? 80, 81? Something like that.
Yeah, it's fuzzy math.
Fuzzy math. It's late in the day, early in the day, I don't know. So then the next one's kind of interesting. We're not going to dive through all of these, but it's the hot topic issues. And so some of these are ones that we see in our nation, and they are the hot button ones. And I know when they come up in confirmation, there's, you can see that divide. Like one of them, which we all know is a huge discussion point in our nation, is abortion.
Yep.
And so the first thing they say is always illegal. Those that worship regularly, 40% of them say, yes, it's always illegal. The non-weekly worshipers, 18% of them say it's always illegal, which that doesn't really surprise me.
Right.
I mean, I see what's on our youth posts on social media and different things, not judging them, but I mean, I think it kind of fits what I would say I see on that one.
Yep.
And then this one, which is something, we talk about in the God and Romance confirmation unit about premarital sex is always wrong. 54% of those that attend worship regularly say yes. 22% of those that are non-weekly say yes, or that that's wrong.
Right.
Which, when you look at our society and our culture, that's right in lines with that, because I would say, you look at the couples that come to be married.
Yeah. Most couples are already
cohabitating.
Yeah.
And so so I mean, I'm not surprised by that. And it goes against what we would say Scripture says, and so, but it just doesn't seem to be a huge issue there.
Yeah, it seems like the greater responses came in the gender and sexuality category, a little bit over the abortion, perhaps, in terms of the questions they asked, I guess, is the thing there. So it's pretty close. The top two hot topics are gender and sexuality and abortion. So that is really what our culture is dealing with right now. So that makes sense.
Yeah, Ordination of Women's on here, which is I was like, is that really what kids are worried about?
Yeah.
But then again, I think about with the job equality and all that stuff. I guess I'm like, that does, every once in a while I had that why can't women be pastors in the LCMS? Right. But here it doesn't seem like
it's kind of split down all the categories. Whether the question is women cannot be pastors, or it's okay for women to be pastors, or I don't know. It's all kind of a third almost,
right.
So they're kind of just figuring it out, perhaps.
Right, and then the next one, I guess, this is another big one, science and religion, because I would say the secular world almost makes it sound like science and religion, they can't get along. They, they disagree all the time, so they don't play well with each other. But as well as I do that there's a lot of science and religion that work very well, and science proves,
Yep.
faith or religion. That was one thing we talked about in confirmation last night, is we dived into God, creation, evolution, and we talked about, is it Psalm 119 or 118 when it talks about how the heavens declare the glory of God, or the handiwork? And we watched one of our favorite videos, The All Factor of God by Francis Chan, where he zooms out however many light years, and you just see how we're just so small and how big the universe really is. I was like, somebody's like, why do we watch this? I'm like, that's why that declares God's handiwork.
Yeah, right.
The heavens declare his handiwork.
It's way beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, because one of the students was like, it just makes me feel small.
I
was like, kind of, we are really small, minuscule in the grand scheme of things.
Well, I saw a similar thing on stars and planets, and it kind of goes from like small to bigger to biggest. And so it goes through this linear progression, and like it does the planets, and obviously, oh wow, Saturn's a lot bigger than, and Jupiter are a lot bigger than the other planets, and then there's the sun, bigger than that, and then you get into these other stars like Canis Major or Betelgeuse, and they're bigger than the sun, but yet you look up in the sky and they're just like these little dots, and that just goes to show how far away they are.
Right.
And like they're just, some of them that they showed were greatly bigger than our sun. So to us, like the sun is so enormous, but it's closer. So yeah, the enormity of the universe shows God's handiwork and his glory.
Yeah, so going on this with the science and religion, they asked, the Bible disproves certain scientific conclusions. Those that attend weekly, 24% agree with that. Non-weekly, 12%. And so I think a lot of that goes to that creation idea of like, is it God creating everything, or it's or creation, or the Big Bang Theory? And I don't know, to me, like the Big Bang Theory, that takes just as much faith as like believing that
a lot of theory in that.
A lot of theory in that. And like the one video we used in confirmation, like the person's like, you have to suspend natural laws in order to prove that the Big Bang Theory happened. It's like, well, if they're natural laws,
then they can't be suspended.
You can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
So you're contradicting yourself when you're so based on facts. And I can't remember the empirical or like science, where like you can't go back and prove that happened, because you can't do any tests to recreate a new world.
Right.
So it's all hypothetical. Like this is what we believe happened. And isn't that what we say as Christians? We believe that God created everything?
Yeah. Right.
And like the intelligent design, like in that we talked in confirmation last night about like 200 muscles move when you take one step.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like I can't name 200 muscles.
No.
Let alone to think, okay, every time I take a step, I'm going, okay, this muscle. Let's work together.
Yeah.
Take this one step. Where I think like, playing basketball. Can you imagine if every step you took when you're running in basketball, you're like, okay, muscle, all these muscles, let's go.
Yeah, they just work together.
And you don't even think about it.
Yeah, right. So, and then it gets into, God created humans at one time in pretty much our current form. Well, 72% of those who worship weekly believe that, and of those non-weekly, 49% feel that. And then it gets into your evolution kind of discussion. Right. These are interesting percentages here.
Yeah, that 16% of those that attend weekly believe that humans evolved over many years and God directed this process, and 29% of those that are non-weekly worship attenders believe that.
Yeah. So in these things, we can see where, those who are regularly involved in church life have stronger views, but yet they still, in this time of their life, are wondering or thinking about other possibilities. Right. And it always seems to trend those who don't worship weekly maybe have a greater propensity to think of these alternative ways.
Right, or maybe what they hear at school, because maybe they go to a public school where you don't hear the faith-based things as much.
Right. Yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with, where they're spending their time, in terms of shaping their thought process.
Right, and not going to dive too much into the next little section of like the I don't know responses, but they said how they noticed that there's an increase on all those kind of things we just talked about: premarital sex, homosexuality, ordination of women, evolution, and human origins, abortions, and genders, and all that stuff. That there's an increase of I don't know from the previous youth gathering.
Yeah, they're still trying to formulate their foundational thoughts on this, I guess. Yeah. as they experience things when they grow.
Right. And then the next is kind of about risky behaviors. So this is good. 90 and 81% of them have never used vaping or e-cigarettes. Mm-hmm. So that's good on both of those that attend weekly and non-weekly. Same with tobacco products. Like 96% of those that attend worship weekly have never used.
That's really surprising.
Yeah,
that's great, but
then again, like you think about it, like I forgot what I was listening to. It was a podcast, I think. It was a podcast, and they were just talking about like TV shows and like, do you really see people smoking in TV shows like you once did? Mm-hmm. Like you hardly see that. Like the one show they did reference that I have seen that and smoking was a big part of it was Mad Men.
Okay,
which was set in the late 60s, because Kennedy's assassination happens during that show.
Okay.
So that's the 60s, but you look at the 60s culture, that was pretty prevalent.
Yeah, right.
And now, like, you can't even show, like, cigarettes on TV unless you're using it as a negative, like, this is how bad it is for you. So I wonder if that applies to that, but that's more frowned upon just overall in society.
Right, yeah. I mean, like, when we were growing up, or at least me, like, you could go to a restaurant and there people were smoking in the restaurant.
Right, smoking or non-smoking section.
And then those two sections came.
That's what I remember as the sections.
Yeah, I remember when there were no sections and it'd be like, oh, you walk in and it's a big cloud. And so then they sectioned it off and a lot of people were happy and a lot of people were unhappy and felt discriminated against. And now you don't see any of that. So that makes sense. Like, okay, if it's not like prevalent out in society and the community in public places, maybe they're not, leaning that way.
And the health concerns, or even like, I think it was when I was a kid. So, you had Joe Cool, the camel. Like, I don't think they can use that like cool looking or like almost kid friendly mascot.
Right. And also, interestingly enough, in today's culture, those who have never used marijuana, 93% who worship weekly have never, and those non-weekly, 86%.
I mean, I hate to admit that, but that almost surprises me a little bit. I would have thought it would have been lower percentages, especially as now more and more states have legalized
it, right?
Marijuana, and it's just kind of interesting. I mean, I look back to like my high school days and like knowing the percentages of people that I knew in high school or worked with. That I'm like, that doesn't line up to.
Yeah, I mean, I know if I think about my high school days, there was more than a 7% population, or even a 14% population who was utilizing marijuana.
Right.
So.
And the next one, you kind of see a little more of a dip here, which I guess doesn't really surprise me either. Mm-hmm. I do like how it's kind of worded: have never drunk alcohol. Other than the Lord's Supper. Yeah. I like that. And other than the Lord's Supper.
Let's distinguish.
But that 68% of those weekly have never partaken in alcohol. And 52% of those that are non-weekly worshipers.
Yeah, and you see that among adults as they interact with their children. They're engaging in alcoholic beverages, and so it's more of a norm. And so this, I think, reflects that.
Right. And the next one, like, it's better, and I guess that's... I guess it is pretty good. Like, you're allowed to see it be 100.
Yeah.
But have never drank more than 5 alcoholic drinks in 24 hours. 94% of those that have attended weekly say that, and 86% of the non-weekly. So that is pretty good. Like, you'd like to see that at 100 because that is a lot of drinks.
For 5. Yeah.
And especially when you think
5 beers is
and you think about them being 13 to 17-year-olds.
Yeah, right.
And especially when it's illegal for them.
Uh-huh.
So it's still kind of scary. I think 6%, that's their life, or have done that.
Yeah.
But it could be a whole lot worse.
Yeah. Now, the next one about have never viewed pornography. I mean, this is interesting that 71% have never viewed it who go to church weekly. 62 who worship non-weekly have viewed it, especially with how easy it is and accessible, on cell phones, on tablets, anything, like, that's interesting.
Not like, our generation. I mean, I know internet existed when I was coming of age.
Yeah.
But, like, you go back prior to that when you had to go to, like, the store, like, to get a magazine or something. And a little more hoops you had to jump through in order to access it or find your stash of who's ever in the house.
Right. or you had a friend who
had it,
and yeah. So that's pretty interesting considering how accessible it is all that I mean by that.
Right. And then the next one is have never been sexually active. 83% of those that attend weekly, 69% of those non-weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would have thought they would have been a little. And it's always that question is like, what do you actually mean by sexually active? Everybody has a different understanding. So, and like I said, I didn't take the survey and I didn't even know it really existed. So I don't know if it gave more like, hey, by this is what we mean.
Right.
Or did people put their own understandings on?
They probably put their own understanding. Yeah.
So I wonder how that could skew things.
Yeah.
And even the taking sexually explicit photos, I don't know, based on what you hear and see, like I thought, and maybe because I've seen just the general statistics of outside of Christianity, or not just a group of Christians, where it's 81% of those that have weekly attend have done that, and 73% of the non-weekly.
Yeah. Okay, how do they spend their time? How are the youth spending their time, Pastor?
So I'm just going to go through the rankings 1 through 9, and because like the percentages here, they don't break it down per. They kind of have percentage in the top 2 activities, then the next are top like 5. But so it goes this order: homework and studying is number 1, sports is number 2, extracurriculars other than sports, so that could be like band or dance would be 3, work is 4, video games is 5. 6 is social activities, 7 is youth ministry, 8 is other church activities, and 9 is volunteering and community service. Which is...
This isn't too surprising to me.
No. I mean, I would have thought sports might have been number 1.
Number 1, yeah.
But it's also heartbreaking, like the 3 things that are like the best for them...
are on the bottom.
On the bottom, it's flipped upside down.
Yeah. And it does show that, our students have a lot of homework. So seems like a close ranking anyway between homework and sports.
Right, and it kind of goes, and I'm just looking up right here. Author Andrew Root, he had a book that came out in 2020 called The End of Youth Ministry: Why Parents Really Don't Care About Your Youth Groups and What Youth Workers Should Do About It. And then in parentheses, Theology for the Life of the World. And like I read through most of that book, and one of the kind of things they talked about in there is like parents are concerned about what looks good on their child's college application.
Yep.
And saying that, oh, well, little Johnny goes to his church's youth group weekly. That doesn't look good on a college application.
Yeah.
But them being involved in all these extracurriculars, that looks good.
Yeah. Interesting, like volunteering community service, more and more people are thinking that, you see teens that have these requirements to do these things, to get scholarships, even if they're in community college, that was the last one.
Right, especially with the younger generations being so socially, like, focused. Like, how can we improve the world that we live in, and socially active in different things? I would have thought that one would have been higher, personally.
Me too. Yeah. And video games is 5th.
Well, who doesn't love a good video game?
Yeah, it was below work. That's interesting. And so I think the next category, social media presence, this will be interesting as it differentiates between what the youth are doing and adults based upon various social media platforms. So the winner of where the youth are really spending their time daily is through messaging apps.
Right. None of this really overall shocks me.
Yeah, me neither.
I guess if I was rating these from what I've seen, messaging apps, I would say, that's number 1, then Snapchat. And then to me, I don't know, I think it'd be a tie between TikTok and Instagram, then YouTube. And I guess I thought Twitter over Facebook.
I would have thought so, too.
Because you always hear kids say, oh, Facebook's for old people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually what it, like, from what I've always seen, like, I always felt like break down, like, kind of ages of, like, those that are on there. Like, Facebook, I thought that's kind of, like, starts with, like, kind of my age, like, mid-30s and up.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense because Facebook came out, I believe, in 2005, which would have put me, like, sophomore year in college. And at that time, you had to have a college email address to even have a Facebook account.
Right.
So, I mean, I know on my Facebook, you can go back to 2005.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of always thought that was kind of like my generation, and up is kind of where Facebook kind of starts. Twitter, I might say, might be the like the decade below like me, like the mid-20s to like, like mid-30s. Mm-hmm. And I base that because that seemed to be the big thing when I first got out of seminary in the youth.
Right.
And that would have been 2011. All of them were like, Pastor, you need to get Twitter. We're sick of tagging you Twitterless Donald on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And that's what made me get Twitter. And then I would say Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok is all kind of that next generation.
I think those three there, particularly TikTok is huge. And interesting when we get to the adult side, it's like on the adult column, how many adults rarely or never use these apps? 79% of adults rarely or never use TikTok, and 70% rarely or never use Snapchat. So the kids are on those, and the adults aren't.
Right. I wonder why.
Yeah.
I mean, out of all these, like I have a Snapchat, I have an Instagram, I have a YouTube. I don't have a TikTok. I have LinkedIn. I guess that's an old person one, probably.
Yeah.
And then Facebook and Twitter. So the only ones out of those I don't have is a TikTok, and I don't see any need to have a TikTok personally. I mean, I've probably been on some of the youth TikToks over the years.
Yeah.
Like I think I did one last year going to C Camp when they were doing one in the airport. I'm like, I just walked across. I'm like, okay, I'll be in it. I'll just do something, walk across. And yeah, I never, I use Snapchat, but I think, to me, I use probably Facebook and Twitter the most, and maybe YouTube just because pastime.
Yeah.
But I probably almost do Twitter more. Like that's usually when I'm at lunch or eating lunch. That's usually when I'm scrolling through is Twitter. Because you get like getting the sports news or just news in general.
Right. You get these quick updates. Yeah.
So yeah, nothing really out of the ordinary like that I saw. I would have thought Twitter above Facebook for the youth, but yeah, not overall that surprising right there. And then just home situation that majority of them live with their biological parents, 85 and 70%. Biological parents are divorced. This is a little surprising, I guess, to me, 9 and 20%. Just knowing the overall statistics is it's around 40% of couples in the United States are divorced.
Right.
But then again, there's also the research that shows that if couples are Christians, the divorce rate is lower, I believe.
Yeah, but not a whole lot.
Okay.
I don't know the current percentages, but last I looked, they're not really disparate.
Okay.
They're pretty close.
And this next one makes perfect sense to me. 92% of those that worship weekly, their parents attend worship weekly. And the non-weekly, 20%. And you see the habits of mom and dad passing down to the younger generation.
Correct.
Which is just scary that when those 20% have kids, what is that next percentage going to be like in that generation?
Yeah. And then the relationship with their parents. Overall, it seems like kids, certainly those who worship weekly, have high marks or feel that they have a pretty good relationship with their parents. And even the non-weekly, fairly good.
I mean, all those ones for the non-weekly are above 56% minus the pray together, which isn't one that's that surprising because even that's the lowest one out of those that pray together for the weekly attenders.
Right.
And these kind of things they bring up here, I discuss life decisions with my parents. My parents and I communicate well. My parents and I rarely fight, and that's like one of those like, what parent and kid have never fought? Like, if you say you've never fought with your parent,
you're not speaking truth.
Right.
Yeah.
My parents are very / mostly supportive of my faith, and you would think that what parent wouldn't be supportive of their child?
Of course, yeah.
And then my parents discuss faith at home.
Which I thought that was really good. As, on the weekly one, it's 82%. And, I know that there's a lot of parents who go to church weekly and still struggle in discussing faith topics with their kids at home. So I'm encouraged by the 82%, and then it falls off to 57%, which is kind of where I see a lot of parents struggling for those who don't worship weekly.
Right, but that's one of those important things, like that parents are the most influential person on their child's faith. There's a ton of research that supports that, whether you look at stuff by Christian Smith or other authors that talk about like faith at home. That's the most important because I think it's Think Orange, which is Reggie Joyner. In there he talks about like how much time does an average like pastor or youth person have with the youth in their youth group in a given year. So let's say if they come to worship weekly, they come to Bible study weekly. So that's 2 hours a week. Let's maybe round up to 3.
Yeah.
So 52 weeks times 3, that's 156.
Yeah, 156.
156 hours in a year that the youth worker has with their the youth.
Yeah.
How many hours does a parent have with their child in a given year?
Yeah. Yeah, a whole lot more. But yet then you know what happens in the home, as kids get older into their teens, they're not hanging around the same rooms with mom and dad.
True.
They're hanging in their own room or going to their friend's house.
And they're not driving from practice or wherever with mom and dad, because once you get the license, you have that freedom to drive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's overall pretty good. This next one, and I don't think we talked about this on air, but we kind of talked, I think, a little bit off air, both of us, but the growing increase of mental health crises and and how it is more talked about in our country, our society. It's not as looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I know I've seen that increase in my ministry over the years, how dealing more with that with kids. And so they asked, 3 questions. And this is and it goes across the board for adult volunteers, adults. And so personally, did you have mental health struggles this year? And what's scary is in 2019, when they asked this question, 33% of the youth said yes. But now, 3 years later, and maybe COVID plays into this.
I must have.
But it's 48%. So you see a 15% increase, and almost half the youth say, yes, I've struggled with mental health this past year. 44% of the YAVs, the 18 to 25-year-olds. And the adults, and who knows what that average age range can be, because that's all over, 28%. And then those that say they've never... In 2019, it was 35% of the youth said never. In 2022, 19% said they've never dealt with it.
Yeah.
23% for the YAVs and 43% of the adults. Mm. But then when you look at someone close to this past year, or close that 50% in 2019, 54% in 2022, 58% both for the YAVs and adults. But when you put the youth ones together, if I'm understanding this correctly, every youth has been affected somehow with somebody, whether themselves or someone close, dealing with mental health. And that's really scary, thinking all kids have somebody they know that have dealt with this.
Right. That's how pervasive it has become in our society. And that's right there. And it shows how we have to really pay attention to this.
So kind of wrapping up, we might skip a couple of these, like the congregational life. It is good to see as a pastor that those that attend weekly 92% feel that their pastors care about them as a person. Because I know both of us care about all of our members,
right? Not
just youth, but all. But I want to kind of wrap up with a couple of these ones. Like, I think this one's an interesting one. What would you look for in a new church? And this is kind of, we don't have to go through percentages, but this is kind of how they rank in priority for them. These two are tied. Style of worship and also in line with my views and belief, both of those are 45%. Then the next is LCMS Lutheran Church, friendly atmosphere, a welcoming community, style of preaching, plenty of people my age, which we can talk about that one in a second.
That's a big drop-off right there. There's like what is that?
15%.
15% drop off where the others were kind of hanging close to each other. That's the point where it breaks a little.
Right. And active and serving in the community, Bible study opportunities to serve or to lead, or honestly, I don't plan to attend church. But to me, that plenty of people my age, that always seems to be the big draw. At least in our area, to the churches that are booming, it's well, that's where all the kids are.
Yep.
But here, it's only 16% of them say that makes a difference.
So it seems like the top categories for their choice is style of worship, in line with their beliefs, LCMS Church, and friendly atmosphere. Those are all kind of huddled around
in the mid-40s. And it's interesting, those, and it's and that could be a whole debate on the style of worship, because, generally speaking, style of worship, the younger generation, they want contemporary, modern worship. But that's not always the case.
No.
There's people I've talked with in our youth that say they like the traditional worship. And I know I was talking to somebody, and they're saying it feels like whatever you grew up with, that's what you like. Which I think there's a lot of truth behind that.
I would agree. Yeah, it's what you're familiar with, what you've grown accustomed to enjoy.
And then kind of wrapping up here, I think we'll just kind of do these next two little ones. And we have issues that concern you the most. And they can select 3, but here's them in order: abortion, mental health, gun control, my future, suicide, reaching unbelievers, college, physical/sexual abuse, gender identity, change, and cancer.
Yeah, and the two top ones in the 30% ranking are abortion and mental health, which we've talked about. Yeah,
and then kind of wrapping up here, you wish your church would talk more about, and from their own words, LGBTQ issues, mental health, abortion, reaching unbelievers, which is kind of interesting because that didn't seem to be a big priority. Yet here, it's number 4.
Yep.
Personal faith, women's equality, and racism.
Yeah. Yeah, so evenly split again are LGBT issues, mental health, and abortion, all around 30-some%.
Yeah, and I guess, as we do wrap up, I know I just said that, but like, where do kids turn for their information? Which this one kind of surprised me.
Yeah, that's why I said we're going to talk about this, and it's the Bible.
Right. The Bible. I would have thought parents or friends would have been higher.
Yeah.
Internet, pastors, friends, social media, catechism, podcasts, videos, other adults, and school teachers.
Yeah, so Bible and parents.
Number 1.
Number 1.
1 and 2.
1 and 2. So, well, that's encouraging.
But we couldn't. But we couldn't beat the internet, us pastors.
Oh, I know. We're 4th. I'll take 4th.
Stupid internet. We're going. Is it Dirty Dancing? Banning dancing. We're banning internet across Emmanuel. But yeah, I thought parents and friends would have been the top 2.
Me too. And social media.
Right, because it does seem to be a big influence.
They're always on it,
That's where they have like a Kylie Jenner, whoever else, like those they're influencers. That's what they call them. And it's just like, that's what they're about. That's the whole idea behind the Fire Fest that was a huge debacle.
Yep.
Was because all these social media influencers hyped it up, and it wasn't what they were sold.
Right. Interesting data, and it was really fun to walk through this, PD. Thanks for bringing it in to have us kind of see where our youth are at with regard to their faith and topics and life issues.
Yeah, thanks for being willing to dive into this and kind of walk our way through it, and hope you all enjoyed listening to this and that it was kind of a blessing, kind of helped you understand the culture of our youth and our church and our society, our culture. And like I said last time, if you enjoy what you're listening to, like, subscribe, share it so more people can enjoy and having fun with the PD and P-Dubs Unscripted show. Thank you and God's blessings.